Well, Alex, thank you for being with us today. Welcome to the Maxim podcast. It's great to have you with us.
Oh, thank you, Jason. It's lovely to be on.
We are talking about your latest column, one that you've written, your first column for Maxim Institute, hopefully the first of many, Digital Dilemma, Why Gen Z Needs Books More Than Ever. Now, you kind of lay out that what is the digital dilemma for Gen Z, and that is the fact that as digital natives, Gen Z are able to navigate the online world deftly and find information, get through that world and find what they're after quite easily, almost as, I guess, a second nature. Yet when it comes to assessing the information that they curate or they find or they come across, maybe a bit lacking, maybe not so much in the assessment factor. Would you just elaborate on that for us? As an official Gen Zer yourself, would you just help us understand some of that?
Sure. Well, I think there are several kind of issues at play, Jason. The first is that most of Gen Z have grown up online. There's only a few, probably the first 5-6 years, that have had a mostly analog childhood, and the rest have basically spent a lot of time on iPads, on phones, have had most of their schooling online as well, and have absorbed material mostly through a computer screen and not physically. And that has several implications. The first is that obviously they don't consume as much print media as previous generations have. It's newspapers, but also books. And I would say that has serious issues because when you're just getting your information through social media, be that kind of Instagram, TikTok, Facebook feeds, you're just getting one perspective, and that's the perspective of the algorithm, or the what the algorithm thinks that you are interested in, which kind of limits what you might be exposed to and the sort of information that you would have otherwise been getting if you were just.
So if we just press on that for a second, the algorithm for some of us who might not understand is like a computer program that runs and monitors the things that you interact with, the things that you like, the things that you spend more time watching or engaging with, and then feeds you up more of those things. Yeah. So it narrows your focus. So like you say, in the end, you only end up with a very a curated view of the world in a sense.
Definitely. Yeah. Like, this is just a silly example, but I love watching Olympic gymnastics, right? And so that happened recently, and just for the last few months, all I've got is gymnasts
just coming
up,
across
which
your
is like,
feed.
I've never done gymnastics. I'm certainly not going to at my age, but it's interesting how it just takes something that it knows that you are interested in, and it just sort of bombards you with that for quite a long time. Yeah. And I don't pretend to understand algorithms, but there's definitely something to it in terms of, how people consume information.
And so there's that algorithm aspect, but there's also, you mentioned a study that talks about the way that Gen Z go about engaging with that, or maybe seeking information online. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, there have been several studies that have basically observed that Gen Z tend to curate emotionally manageable sort of ecosystems where the information doesn't sort of upset them or challenge them. It's sort of safe, and it means that they don't have to engage with things that they might disagree with, or that their friends might disagree with. And I think we see that reflected quite a bit in cancel culture, which Gen Z has grown up with to a large extent the last sort of decade. And so you can just say, that's too much for me, or I'm not interested in hearing your perspective and your opinion because it's deemed to be wrong by the media or my peers. So, I think there's it's really interesting that these studies have found that people, instead of seeking truth, are seeking information that sort of aligns with how they feel and things that make them feel
That's
good.
really interesting, because you often think if you're going to, from me, I think the generation above you as a millennial, I think of finding the answer to something. That's why I go looking, not looking to reinforce my own perspective on the world. So I go, well, I want to find out about X, Y, Z. So what's out there, and try and find a range of opinions, of articles, of perspectives that then will inform my own kind of filtering of that. But that's not what happens. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and I just don't think it's helped by the fact that when you go to university now, you're given a perspective, or you're given a framework from which to sort of analyse a topic or the world in general. And so that encourages people to just pursue a single sort of thread of thought, as opposed to lots of different views. So where you might have once had an institution that was sort of helping people to think quite critically about information they're receiving, I just don't know that that's a reliable, or a university education's a reliable indicator of your ability to do that anymore either, which is slightly concerning. Yeah.
Okay, so you have this study. Have you encountered this in your personal life or with people you've seen at all?
Yeah, I think that was the prompting sort of thing for this column, was having conversations with people my age and a wee bit younger, who either just weren't aware at all of information that was quite key. So I think I mentioned in the column a young man who had no idea that for example, that Hamas had attacked Israel and sort of brutally killed young people at a music festival. That didn't sort of seem to be a piece of information he knew anything about, but he was very, very concerned by the conflict at the time in Gaza. Which
in itself is a fascinating piece of information to note, right? Is that someone who was very aware that there's a conflict going on, wasn't aware of the inciting incident of that conflict.
No.
Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting that he said he got most of his news through Instagram, which I think is a telltale sign there, because you just don't get context. You just get short, sharp kind of
and algorithmic delivered, delivered to your personal preferences. So
definitely.
It would definitely filter that out. Any other? Because as we were talking, I think before, you mentioned friends, university friends that have the dynamic of the relationship, you say, has changed because of just difference of opinion.
Yeah, I thought it was quite interesting sort of towards the end of my degree, people who probably I would have been really keen to continue friendships with, because we had similar interests, really loved reading and politics, and studied the same sort of things, were very confronted when I sort of had opinions that they didn't share. And instead of sort of, I would kind of view that as, I like kind of the back and forth. I'm happy to debate you on this, but I still like you as a person, you know. I still really would love to be friends with you. I think it's interesting that more and more people my age just can't seem to hold that tension. And I've talked to lots of young people in similar boats where they just feel that, oh gosh, like if I say one thing that my peer group don't agree with, or might be a slightly different take on an issue, I'm really going to be ostracized, or sort of, deemed to be this terrible person, which I think, as the research shows, particularly among adolescents, like that's the worst thing ever, would be to be sort of not cool or rejected.
Isolated.
But I think it's interesting when the media does it, it sort of cancels people left, right, and centre. That does trickle down to relationships as well.
It's going to have an effect, So if we try and figure out, so that's kind of the problem. You've proposed an interesting analog alternative to the digital dilemma. which is reading books. So help me understand how reading books might counteract some of this online short form, algorithmic, everything is curated for my own enjoyment and agreement. How might reading books counteract some of that?
Yeah, and it's not, I should say it's not a radical solution. I'm proposing,
no, but it is
not
something,
the first.
I think it is out of the box solution given the prevalence of people's engagement with social media and the digital space these days. So
yeah, well, that's true. I think there's probably two prongs to it. Obviously, the first is to actually pick up a book and train yourself almost to be able to sit down with content for a longer period of time than a few seconds that you might read something on Instagram, and that in turn sort of slows your thinking down.
Which is fascinating because I think a lot of people can spend hours on their phone,
yes,
but they're not engaging in a single piece of content in the same way that they would engage with a book. So they may, in an hour, you may watch 60 1-minute reels. But if you're sitting down for an hour reading a book, you're engaging with just one piece of content that has a sustained argument, hopefully, and that forces you, like you say, to slow down. So, yeah,
and I guess it's also inherently more reliable. Someone did have an argument with me who was 14 about whether it was reliable or not, books, but I sort of said I think pretty sure when they have to be published and things have to be vetted and verified. Of course, that's always
there are rules for
there
books
are rules.
and things like that, right? You can't just publish whatever you want or plagiarize and misaccredit and misattribute and things like that. So
definitely.
So
and I think
it helps you slow down. The quality of information is better. And what else?
Well, I was sort of going to say that it's all very well doing that, but I think you also have to have some skills as well to interpret what you're reading. And once you would have probably hoped that all students coming through schools would have been given those tools, mostly through, I would say, the teaching of history, which is one of the things I studied at university. But having the ability to, assess whether something is reliable, what the biases are, the veracity of the claims being made, things like that. Actually, skills that unless we're quite deliberate about instilling in kids are not natural. Are not going to sort of, particularly reading things online, you don't get that. So I think, having physical material alongside a framework to interpret what you're reading is really important. And
you mentioned one book or resource, Reading Like a Historian. Just unpack that for us and tell me a little bit about what that does.
Yeah, well, I think it started as a curriculum resource that came out of Stanford University in the States. And they were a group of researchers who were wanting to look at kind of history curriculums in middle, high schools in the US and make sure that teachers were, getting across those really essential skills. And so things like contextualization, corroborating information, your source reliability, all of that. And so it was basically a curriculum tool that kind of covered a lot of aspects of US history that used those concepts to sort of teach historical reasoning and reading comprehension at the same time. And they found that there were markedly increased rates of reading comprehension as a result of teachers using that program with students. And I haven't read the book that came out of that, but I assume similar points were made there.
Yeah, so the idea that, and I mean, those skills are applicable across a wide range of disciplines, right? Critical thinking, contextualization, all those sorts of things are really important for when you are trying to make sense of any information. So I I guess if people want to go and grab a resource that's going to help them read, because there's a lot of books out there, but this would be one book that probably is worth getting if it's going to teach you or pass on to a Gen Z young person that you know, this book. But Alex, thank you for being with us today. It's really insightful into a younger generation and a really interesting antidote to the digital dilemma. And let's hope that we can get more books into more young people's hands and see a bit more critical thinking skills. So thanks for being with us today. Yeah.
Cheers. "2024 marks a milestone for many of Generation Z, born 1997 to 2012. Most of them will have spent more than half their lives with a smartphone in their hands. Hence the description, digital native. How do I know this? Well, I was born in 2000. I'm a Gen Zer. My observation is that we may be able to navigate the technological world deftly. However, it's not clear we command the same skill in assessing the information therein. I'm not alone. A 2023 study found that Gen Z encounters information through a lens prioritising social belonging over truth. We also demonstrate a tendency to curate information ecosystems comprising short, emotionally manageable, and personally relevant content. Thus, our print media, hoping to stay relevant, is trying to appeal to Gen Z. Stuff has introduced 30-second Instagram Reel-style shorts, TVNZ Re-News, and The Herald, What the Actual. In my view, the latter two have as much journalistic rigour as university student magazines. The problem with such ultra-short form media is that the snappy format provides minimal context and is filtered through a groupthink lens that tells us what to think, not how to think. So, my generation, already impaired in comprehending, critiquing, and rationally engaging with different opinions and observable facts, may encounter more misinformation. Some examples: the 20-year-old I recently met who was disgusted by the Israel-Gaza conflict, but also utterly unaware of Hamas's brutal October attack on Israel. Or a public servant I talked to who worried that recent graduates have seemingly never been challenged on their rigid activist policy positions and worldviews. Gen Z increasingly lacks adequate epistemic criteria such as credibility or reliability. Combining poorly developed historical consciousness and feeds, this is a recipe for cultural disaster. The problem isn't entirely our fault. Instead, our institutions have failed to help us navigate endless, instant access to information. What could possibly buck this insidious trend? A book? Reading is a discipline we can very easily lose. Retraining our brains and attention spans away from bite-sized takes is difficult. Still, there is probably no better antidote to the malaise I've described than being introduced to as wide a range of knowledge and perspectives from sources that are more likely to be of quality, edited and vetted. In the US, Stanford's Reading Like a Historian trains students in skills such as contextualization, corroboration, and source reliability. It markedly increases students' historical reasoning and reading comprehension. Professor Sam Weinberg, one of the book's authors, notes, if our curriculum has anything to do with career preparation, its focus is the vocation of the citizen. The digital world demands this approach. It would be transformative if an equivalent of this program was introduced and made compulsory for our intermediate and secondary schools. History provides the essential foundation needed to assess the accuracy of the constant digital onslaught vying for our attention. As attention spans contract, developing critical thinkers and lifelong learners has never been so vital. Please buy that book. The next time you see a Gen Zer hunched over their phone, give it to us.